The conference room aboard the orbital station fell silent as Colonel Vexthar's translator implant processed the impossible request. The massive Krilthan officer stood nearly 8 feet tall, his chitinous armor gleaming under the cold lights, and his 4 eyes narrowed at the human representative across the table. "You wish to send a rescue team to Hadron 7? Vexthar's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement or disbelief. "The planet is under siege by Vorath raiders. Their fleet controls the orbital space. Their ground forces have surrounded the research colony. Any ship attempting atmospheric entry will be shot down within seconds." Captain Sarah Mitchell sat perfectly still, her hands folded on the table before her. She was small by Krilthan standards, barely reaching 5.5 feet, with streaks of gray in her dark hair that spoke of too many years in command. Her flight suit bore the faded patches of a dozen campaigns, and her eyes held the kind of calm that came from staring down death more times than she cared to count. "There are 47 researchers down there, Colonel," she said quietly. 12 of them are children. The Vorath don't take prisoners, and we both know what they do to civilians. We have 6 hours before their ground assault begins. I'm going to get those people out." Around the table, representatives from a dozen allied species shifted uncomfortably. The Krilthan Empire was the strongest military power in the sector, and even they refused to challenge the Vorath blockade of Hadron 7. The raiders had brought 3 heavy cruisers and twice that many destroyers. Their reputation for brutality was matched only by their effectiveness in combat. Ambassador Thelnock, a wispy Etherian whose translucent body shimmered with nervous energy, spoke in his musical voice. "Captain Mitchell, we understand your emotional attachment to your species, but this is a suicide mission. Even if you somehow breach the blockade, the Vorath have anti-aircraft batteries covering every approach vector. No ship can make it to the surface." "Then I won't use a ship," Sarah replied. Vexithar's eyes widened slightly, the first real emotion he'd shown. "You mean to use aircraft? Atmospheric fighters? Captain, forgive my bluntness, but that is somehow more insane than your original proposal. Aircraft lack shields, have limited weapons, and move at a fraction of the speed of even basic shuttles. They would be obliterated." "Maybe," Sarah acknowledged. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a data chip, sliding it across the table. "Or maybe you're underestimating what human engineering can do when we're desperate enough." The Krilthan picked up the chip with one clawed hand, his expression skeptical. "What is this?" "Our proposal. We bring in 30 pilots and their aircraft. Fast low-altitude insertion while your fleet creates a diversion in high orbit. We hit the colony, load everyone we can, and get out before the Vorath know what happened. And if they do know? If they track you?" Sarah's smile was grim. "Then, we show them why humans are still flying aircraft 500 years after we reached the stars." Vexithar inserted the chip into his console, and holographic displays flickered to life above the table. His eyes scanned the data, and his mandibles stopped clicking. The silence stretched for a long moment. "These specifications," he said slowly, "they cannot be accurate. This aircraft, the A-10 Thunderbolt, you claim it can survive direct hits from plasma cannons? With the right pilot, yes. It says here the primary weapon is a rotary cannon firing depleted uranium rounds. Kinetic weapons?" The disbelief was clear in his voice. "Captain, the galaxy abandoned kinetic weapons 3 centuries ago. They're too slow, too heavy, too primitive. They're also too simple to jam, too reliable to fail, and too devastating to ignore," Sarah countered. "That cannon fires 65 rounds per second. Each round can punch through 6 inches of hardened steel. The Vorath might have shields that can deflect energy weapons, but I guarantee they've never seen anything like what a Gau-8 Avenger can do." Ambassador Thelnock drifted closer to the display, his ethereal form pulsing with curiosity. "But Captain, even if your weapons are effective, the aircraft themselves appear to be built for durability rather than speed. Maximum atmospheric speed of only 400 miles per hour? Our shuttles can travel 3 times that fast." "Speed isn't everything, Ambassador. The Warthog, that's what we call the A-10, was designed for one thing: to take punishment and keep flying. It has redundant flight systems, self-sealing fuel tanks, and a titanium bathtub protecting the pilot. I've seen these birds come home, with half a wing missing, engine shot out, and hydraulics gone, and they still landed safely. Colonel Vexthar's 4 eyes remained fixed on the data. You also list other aircraft, F-16s, F-35s, even something called an Apache gunship. You truly believe this collection of ancient technology can succeed where modern military vessels would fail? Sarah leaned forward, and for the first time, steel entered her voice. Colonel, 2 months ago, my squadron was providing ground support on Kelvin 3 when we got ambushed by Vorath scouts. They had 4 gunships against my 6 warthogs, told us to surrender or be destroyed. We lost 2 birds, but all 4 of their gunships are now scrap metal floating in orbit. When you fly low, when you fly ugly, when you fly something the enemy has never faced before, you have an advantage that no amount of advanced technology can match: unpredictability. The Krilthan was quiet for a long time, his claws tapping rhythmically on the table. Finally, he stood to his full imposing height. You understand that the Council cannot officially sanction this mission? If you fail, if you are captured, we cannot acknowledge your actions. Understood. And you understand that even if you succeed in reaching the surface, extraction will be nearly impossible? The Vorath will throw everything they have at you. We'll manage. Vexithar's mandibles clicked, and what Sarah had learned was the Krilthan equivalent of a resigned sigh. Very well, Captain Mitchell. The Krilthan Empire will provide you with a carrier to transport your aircraft within range of Hadron 7. We will also stage a diversionary attack on the blockade to draw their attention. But I want to be clear. This is not because I believe you will succeed. This is because those researchers deserve a chance, however slim, and you humans seem constitutionally incapable of accepting the word impossible. Sarah stood and offered her hand. After a moment's hesitation, Vexthar extended his massive claw and shook it carefully. One more thing, the colonel added. This carrier we're providing can accommodate perhaps 20 of your aircraft in its hangar. Choose wisely. I'll need room for 30, Colonel. That is not possible. The hangar cannot fit more than 20 of the largest designs you showed me. Sarah's smile returned, this time with a hint of mischief. Then I guess you're about to learn. Another thing about human engineering, we don't just build aircraft to fight. We build them to fit anywhere, launch from anywhere, and operate under any conditions. You give me that carrier and I'll get 30 birds aboard. As the meeting adjourned and the various representatives filed out, Vexithar stood alone at the viewport, staring down at the blue-green planet below. His adjutant approached quietly. Sir, do you truly believe they can succeed? The colonel's 4 eyes reflected the starlight. No, Lieutenant, but I've learned something about humans in my years dealing with them. They have a saying. It's not the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the dog. Their aircraft may be primitive, their tactics may be outdated, but their determination? He paused. That is something the Vorath have never encountered, and it may be enough to give them pause, if only for a moment. And if the humans fail? Vexthar turned away from the viewport. Then 47 innocents die, and we lose 30 brave fools who were willing to try the impossible. But at least they will die knowing someone cared enough to try. He moved toward the door, then stopped. Prepare my personal shuttle. I want to see these aircraft of theirs when they arrive. If Captain Mitchell is going to fly into certain death, the least I can do is bear witness to her courage. The adjutant saluted and hurried away, leaving the colonel alone with his thoughts and the distant stars that held so many secrets. So many unknowns, and somewhere in the darkness, 30 human pilots preparing to prove that sometimes old ways were the best ways. The hangar deck of the Krilthan carrier Steadfast Resolve was a cathedral of alien engineering. The ceiling soared 300 feet overhead, supported by massive structural beams that glowed with integrated lighting. The deck itself could have accommodated a small city, and it currently housed 24 Krilthan fighter craft, each one sleek and deadly, bristling with energy weapons and shield generators. Colonel Vexthar stood at the observation platform, watching as the first human transport vessel maneuvered into the docking bay. The ship was ugly by Krilthan standards, all sharp angles and exposed plating, but it moved with surprising grace as it settled onto the deck with barely a tremor. The rear cargo door began to lower, and Vexthar found himself leaning forward slightly, curiosity overcoming his usual military bearing. He had reviewed the technical specifications for human aircraft dozens of times in the past 2 days. But data on a screen was one thing. Seeing these machines in person would be something else entirely. What emerged first made his mandibles go slack with shock. It was gray and brutal, shaped like a cross between a predatory bird and a flying tank. The nose was long and narrow, housing that massive rotary cannon Captain Mitchell had described. The wings were straight and thick, positioned high on the fuselage, and beneath them hung an array of weapons that looked primitive and devastating in equal measure. 2 massive engines sat at the rear, mounted high above the tail section, and as the aircraft rolled forward on its landing gear, Vexthar could see the titanium armor plating around the cockpit gleaming under the hangar lights. The A-10 Thunderbolt came to a stop and the canopy opened. Captain Mitchell climbed out, dropping to the deck with practiced ease despite the 15-foot fall. She wore a full flight suit now, helmet tucked under one arm, and she looked up at the observation platform with a wave. "What do you think, Colonel?" Her voice came through the comm system clearly. "She's a beauty, isn't she?" Vexthar activated his own communicator. "Captain, I must confess I expected something more sophisticated. This aircraft looks like it was designed by someone who had never seen a proper flying machine." Sarah laughed, a sound that echoed through the vast hangar. "You're not wrong, Colonel. The Warthog was designed in the 1970s by Earth reckoning, nearly 500 years ago. But here's the thing. When you design something right the first time, you don't need to change it much." She patted the landing gear affectionately. "This particular bird is only 70 years old, but she's been rebuilt and upgraded so many times that she's practically immortal." Shot down twice, both times the pilot walked away. That's the kind of machine you want when you're flying into hell. Behind the first A-10, more transport ships were arriving. The hangar became a controlled chaos of activity as aircraft were unloaded one by one. Vexthar watched in fascination as the variety became apparent. There were sleek fighter jets that moved on rails, their lines more angular than Krilthan craft but recognizably designed for speed. There were helicopters, their rotor blades folded back looking like strange insects waiting to spread their wings. One aircraft in particular caught his attention. It was painted in dark colors with sharp angles that seemed designed to confuse the eye. An F-35 according to his database, though this one had been modified extensively. A young human pilot, barely out of his 20s by appearance, was directing the unloading with hand signals and comm chatter. His call sign, Whiskey, was stenciled on his helmet. He moved with the kind of confidence that came from hours in a cockpit, and Vexthar noticed the other pilots deferred to him despite his youth. "Captain Mitchell," Vexthar said over the comm, "I count 17 aircraft so far. You insisted you needed 30. My hangar staff calculated it would be impossible to fit more than 20 of your largest machines in the available space." Sarah's grin was visible even from the observation deck. "Watch and learn, Colonel." "Hey, Whiskey, show our hosts how we maximize space." The young pilot gave a thumbs up and turned to his crew. What happened next made Vexthar's 4 eyes widen in surprise. The wings of the F-35 began to fold upward, hydraulics hissing as the entire wingspan reduced by almost half. The tail section rotated, compacting the aircraft's footprint. Within minutes, what had been a large fighter jet became something that could fit in a space barely larger than a ground vehicle. "Folding wings," Sarah explained, walking across the deck toward the observation platform. "Old carrier technology from Earth's naval days. If you're going to launch aircraft from a ship in the middle of the ocean, you need to pack them tight. Same principle applies in space." She gestured to the growing collection of aircraft. "Half my birds can fold up like that. The ones that can't, we stack smart. Helicopters can nestle together with their rotors positioned just right. The Warthogs are narrow enough to park in diagonal rows, and that's how we get 30 aircraft in a space designed for 20. More transports arrived, and the hangar filled with a bewildering variety of flying machines. Vexthar descended from the observation platform to get a closer look, his adjutant and a team of Krilthan engineers following behind. Up close, the human aircraft were even more remarkable. The materials were a mix of composites and metals that seemed almost primitive compared to the energy-reactive smart materials used in modern craft. Yet the construction was solid, robust, designed to take damage and keep functioning. The weapons were almost entirely kinetic, missiles and cannons and rockets, with only a few energy-based systems that looked like recent additions. One of the Krilthan engineers approached an Apache helicopter, running scanning equipment over its armor plating. "Colonel, these readings are strange. The armor is not ablative, not self-healing, and yet it's rated to survive multiple direct hits from anti-aircraft fire. How is this possible?" "Thickness and redundancy," came a new voice. A human pilot with graying hair and a scar across his cheek had appeared beside them. His name patch read Hammer. "That bird there has survived 3 combat deployments and a crash landing that should have killed everyone aboard. We cut away the damaged sections, welded in new ones, and she flew again within a week." "You can't do that with your fancy nanomaterials." The Krilthan engineer looked skeptical. "But surely the weight of such armor impacts performance? Our fighters achieve superior speed through lightweight construction." Hammer shrugged.
"Speed isn't everything, friend."
"That Apache can hover in place behind a ridgeline, pop up, launch missiles, and drop back down before enemy radar gets a solid lock. Try doing that in your fighter jets." He gestured to the rotors. "And those blades can take small arms fire, even shrapnel, and keep spinning. We've had birds come back looking like they went through a shredder, but as long as the rotors turn and the engines run, they make it home." Vexthar moved through the hangar, observing everything. He watched as pilots gathered in small groups, checking their aircraft, running through pre-flight routines that looked well practiced. There was an easy camaraderie among them, jokes and laughter mixed with serious technical discussions. These were not desperate volunteers or glory seekers. These were professional warriors who knew exactly what they were getting into. Captain Mitchell appeared at his side, having navigated through the crowd. "Want to see inside one?" "That would be instructive, Captain." She led him to her personal A-10, and a crew member rolled a ladder up to the cockpit. Vexthar climbed carefully, mindful of his size, and peered into the cramped space. It was shockingly simple. Analog gauges mixed with digital displays, physical switches, and levers instead of holographic touch controls, and that massive control stick positioned between the pilot's legs. Everything was within arm's reach, designed for quick access in combat. There was no artificial intelligence assistance, no neural interface, no predictive targeting systems. Just a pilot, a machine, and direct control. "This is how you fly?" Vexthar asked, unable to keep the disbelief from his voice. "No computer assistance? No automated systems?" "Oh, we've got computers," Sarah said, climbing up beside him. "Targeting, navigation, weapons management. But the flying? That's all manual. When things go bad, when systems fail, I want my hands on the controls making the decisions. Computers can be jammed, hacked, shut down. Human instinct and training? That's always there." She pointed to various instruments. "This tells me airspeed. This is altitude. This is my weapon status. Everything I need to know at a glance, nothing complicated. Nothing that can fail in a way I can't work around. You see that switch there? That's my manual reversion. If I lose all hydraulics, all power, everything, I can still control this bird with pure mechanical linkages and muscle. It'll be hard, but it's possible. Can you do that in your fighters?" Vexthar had to admit he could not. Krilthan fighters relied on computer systems for everything from flight control to life support. Lose power, and the craft became a tomb. As they descended from the cockpit, alarms began sounding throughout the hangar. Vexthar's communicator crackled to life, his bridge crew urgent. "Colonel, long-range sensors have detected the Vorath fleet repositioning. They're moving closer to Hadron 7. Intelligence suggests they may be advancing their assault timeline." Sarah's expression hardened. She turned to face the assembled pilots, her voice carrying across the hangar without need for amplification. The bridge of the Steadfast Resolve hummed with quiet efficiency as the carrier moved into position. Colonel Vexthar stood at the center, his 4 eyes scanning multiple holographic displays that showed the tactical situation in painful detail. The Vorath blockade was a classic siege formation. 3 heavy cruisers in high orbit, destroyers positioned at strategic intervals, and enough fighters to blanket any approach vector. On paper, it was unbreakable. In practice, it had held for 6 days without a single ship getting through. Captain Mitchell stood beside him, her flight suit fully sealed now, helmet hanging from a clip at her waist. She studied the displays with the focused intensity of a veteran warrior, occasionally zooming in on specific sections to examine patrol patterns and weapon placements. "They're good," she admitted quietly. "Disciplined formations, overlapping fields of fire, regular patrol rotations. Whoever's commanding that fleet knows what they're doing." Vexthar's mandibles clicked in agreement. War leader Krethnak, one of the Vorath's most experienced commanders. He's broken 3 blockades and destroyed twice that many relief fleets. He will not underestimate us. Then we won't give him time to estimate at all. Sarah pointed to a gap in the patrol patterns, barely noticeable unless you knew what to look for. Right there. That's our window. Your diversionary attack hits here, here, and here. She indicated 3 points on the display. Draw their attention upward. Make them think you're trying to force through a supply convoy in high orbit. And while they are distracted, your aircraft drop from low orbit? Vexthar studied the approach vectors. The atmospheric insertion will be extremely dangerous. The friction alone could destroy unshielded craft. Sarah's smile was thin. Colonel, the first Thunderbolts flew on Earth in an atmosphere thick enough to breathe. We've been doing atmospheric re-entry for 5 centuries. The trick isn't surviving the heat. The trick is doing it fast enough and low enough that their sensors don't pick us up until we're already through. Behind them, the bridge crew worked efficiently, preparing the carrier for combat operations. Krilthan officers, each one trained to military perfection, coordinated with the fleet elements moving into support positions. Vexthar had pulled together every favor he was owed, called in debts from decades of service to assemble this force. 8 cruisers, 15 destroyers, and 2 full fighter wings. Not enough to break the blockade, but enough to make Krethnak think they were trying. The tactical officer, a young female named Sheltar, turned from her console. Colonel, all fleet elements report ready. Human aircraft are secured in their deployment pods. We can begin the operation on your command. Deployment pods? Vexthar looked at Sarah with surprise. I thought your aircraft would simply launch from the hangar. Too slow, too obvious, Sarah replied. She brought up a schematic on her personal display and enlarged it for everyone to see. We welded together 30 drop pods from your surplus inventory. Each one contains a single aircraft sealed and protected. When we reach the drop point, you blow the pod seals and we fall free. From the outside, it'll look like you're jettisoning damaged cargo or debris. By the time the Vorath figure out what we really are, we'll be in atmosphere and invisible to their orbital sensors. A Krilthan engineering officer stepped forward, his expression troubled. Captain, I reviewed those pod modifications. The margins are extremely thin. If even one seal fails prematurely, the occupant will be exposed to vacuum. Then we'd better hope your welders did good work, Sarah said calmly. Whiskey, you monitoring this? The young pilot's voice came through the comm system from the hangar deck below. Copy that, Warhawk. All birds are secured in pods. Seals are triple-checked. Environmental systems are active. We're ready to drop on your signal. Vexthar pulled up the operational timeline on his command display. The diversionary attack begins in 20 minutes. You will have a 45-second window to deploy. If you miss that window, Krethnak will realize something is wrong and adjust his formations. You will be flying into a prepared defense. We won't miss it, Sarah said with confidence. She turned to face the colonel directly, and for the first time since they'd met, he saw something other than cool professionalism in her expression. There was a hint of vulnerability, a flash of the weight she carried. Colonel, I need to ask you something. Off the record. Vexthar gestured to a side chamber and they stepped away from the bridge crew. The door sealed behind them, muffling the sounds of preparation outside. Speak freely, Captain. Sarah took a breath. Why are you doing this? You could have said no. Your council would have understood. No one expects the Krilthan Empire to risk ships and lives for a human research colony. So why? Vexthar was quiet for a moment, his claws tapping against his armored thigh. When he spoke, his translator implant gave his words a weight that went beyond mere sound. 10 years ago, Captain, I commanded a garrison on the frontier world of Kelvash. It was a peaceful posting, mostly administrative work and training exercises. Then the Vorath came, 3 raids in as many months. They took civilians, destroyed farms, burned settlements. Our response fleets were always too slow, too cautious. We followed proper protocols, maintained proper formations, and hundreds died while we calculated proper tactical responses. He moved to the small viewport, staring out at the stars. The 4th raid, we got lucky. A human merchant ship, the Valiant Trader, was in system when the Vorath attacked. They weren't military. They weren't even armed officially. But their captain heard the distress call, and instead of jumping to safety, they flew directly toward the Vorath raiding party. Sarah's eyes widened slightly. That's insane. That's what I said. I ordered them to retreat, told them they would be destroyed, The captain, a woman named Torres, she laughed at me. She said, "Colonel, we've got cargo containers and a good pilot. You'd be amazed what kind of damage that can do to someone not expecting it." Then she cut the connection and went to full thrust. Bexthar's mandibles clicked, and what Sarah had learned was a Krilthan expression of grudging respect. She rammed 2 Vorath gunships, disabled a third with debris from her own exploding cargo bays, and gave my fighters enough time to arrive and drive off the rest. By the time we reached her, the valiant trader was a broken shell. We rescued 12 crew members from the wreckage. Captain Torres was not among them. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of sacrifice and memory. I asked the survivors why. Bexthar continued. Why throw away their lives for a world that wasn't theirs, for people they'd never met? They looked at me like I'd asked why the stars shine. One of them, young engineer named Kim, he said, "Because when someone needs help, you help. That's not a human thing or an alien thing. That's just the right thing." He turned back to face Sarah. "So when you asked for our help, when you stood in that conference room and demanded the impossible for 47 people you don't know, I saw Captain Torres again. I saw that same stubborn refusal to accept no when lives are at stake. And I thought, if humans can throw themselves into certain death for strangers, the least I can do is give them a fighting chance to succeed." Sarah swallowed hard, blinking against unexpected moisture in her eyes. The valiant trader. I knew someone on that ship. Torres was my first flight instructor, back when I was learning to fly cargo runs. She taught me that fancy flying is fine for air shows, but when it matters, you fly simple, fly smart, and fly for your crew. Then honor her memory, Vexthar said. Get those researchers out. Show the galaxy that humanity's courage isn't limited to merchant captains with delusions of heroism. Show them that professional warriors can be just as foolishly brave when the situation demands it. Sarah straightened, and when she spoke, her voice was steady. We will, Colonel. You have my word. They returned to the bridge as the final minutes counted down. Sarah opened a channel to all the aircraft secured in their deployment pods. All wings, this is Warhawk. We're 5 minutes from drop. Everyone remember their briefings. We go in low, we go in fast, and we go in together. The Vorath are going to throw everything at us. They're going to tell you it's hopeless, that you should surrender, that resistance is futile. You know what you do when they say that? You remember every human pilot who ever faced impossible odds. You remember Torres on the Valiant Trader. You remember the Doolittle Raiders who bombed Tokyo with no way home. You remember every stubborn, crazy, magnificent fool who looked at certain death and said, yeah, but what if I try anyway? Those 47 people down there are counting on us. Let's not disappoint them. Warhawk out. Across the fleet, the final preparations completed. Krilthan cruisers charged their weapons, fighters launched from carriers, and 8 separate task forces moved into attack positions. The trap was set, the bait was ready, and war leader Krethnak was about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one that refuses to fight by your rules. On the hangar deck, sealed in her deployment pod with her beloved A-10 surrounding her like a mechanical womb, Sarah ran through her pre-flight checklist one more time. Fuel check. Weapons check. Systems all green. The pod was dark except for the glow of her instruments, and she could feel the gentle vibration of the carrier's engines through the hull. The deployment pod shook violently as it hit the upper atmosphere of Hadron 7. Inside, sealed in her cockpit, Sarah Mitchell felt every rattle and shudder through her flight suit. The temperature gauges climbed steadily as atmospheric friction turned the pod's outer hull into a briefly glowing meteor. Her instruments showed altitude dropping rapidly. 80,000 feet, 70, 60. Warhawk to all wings, sound off, she said into her comm, keeping her voice calm despite the buffeting. Whiskey, pod stable, systems green. Hammer, rattling like a damn paint mixer but holding together. Falcon good to go. Spectre ready for deployment. One by one, 29 other voices confirmed their status. All 30 pods were intact. All 30 pilots were ready. Above them, the Krilthan diversionary attack was in full swing, drawing the Vorath fleet's attention to the high orbital zone, where 8 cruisers were making a coordinated push toward the blockade. Sarah watched her altimeter spin downward. 40,000 feet. 35. At 30,000 feet, exactly as planned, the pod's exterior seals blew away in a carefully choreographed explosion. The deployment pedals peeled back like a mechanical flower, and suddenly Sarah was flying, The A-10 Thunderbolt dropped free from the pod's embrace and Sarah's hands moved automatically through the procedures she'd practiced 10,000 times. Engine startup, wings extending to full position, control surfaces responding. The Warthogs, twin turbofans spooled up with their characteristic whistle growl, and she felt the aircraft come alive beneath her hands. "Warhawk is airborne and operational," she reported, pulling up from the dive and leveling off at 15,000 feet. "All wings report." Around her, in a loose formation that stretched for miles, 29 other aircraft were emerging from their pods. F-16s split off to establish high cover, their speed and maneuverability making them perfect for air superiority. F-35s, with their stealth capabilities somewhat intact even with the pod modifications, took mid-level positions. The Apache helicopters dropped lower, hugging the terrain that was rapidly coming into view below, and 6 more A-10s, including Sarah's, formed up in a loose wall of flying death that would make up the primary ground attack element. The planet of Hadron 7 was beautiful from altitude. Rolling hills covered in purple vegetation, crystal clear, rivers cutting through valleys, and in the distance, the sprawling research colony that was their target. It looked peaceful, serene. But Sarah's threat display was already painting a different picture. "Contact, contact!" Whiskey's voice crackled through the comm. Multiple bogies launching from the Vorath ground base, bearing 270, distance 40 miles and closing fast. Sarah's radar picked them up a moment later. 8 Vorath interceptors, sleek craft built for speed and armed with plasma cannons that could tear through conventional shields like paper. They were designed to fight modern military vessels, craft that relied on energy shields and electronic countermeasures. They had never fought anything like the A-10 Thunderbolt. "All wings weapons free," Sarah commanded. "F-16s, take those interceptors. Show them what Earth's fighting falcons can do. Everyone else stay on mission. We get to that colony, we load up, and we get out. Simple plan. Simple execution." "Roger that, Warhawk," came the response from Viper, the lead F-16 pilot. "All Falcon elements, break high and engage. Fox 3. The F-16s accelerated, their more powerful engines pushing them past Mach 1 in seconds. Sarah watched on her tactical display as 8 human fighters moved to intercept 8 Vorath craft. The speeds involved were incredible, both forces closing at combined velocities that would have been impossible in atmospheric combat a century ago. But the human pilots had been training for this. They knew their aircraft, knew their weapons, and most importantly, they knew how to think like predators instead of prey. The first Vorath interceptor died without ever understanding what killed it. Viper's AIM-120 missile, a fire-and-forget weapon that required no fancy targeting locks or computer coordination, simply flew straight and true. The Vorath pilot tried to evade, banking hard and activating electronic countermeasures that would have spoofed modern guided weapons. The missile ignored all of it, following its simple internal guidance system, and detonated close enough that the shrapnel tore through the interceptor's hull. "Splash 1, Viper called out, satisfaction clear in his voice. "These guys have never seen kinetic weapons before. Their countermeasures are useless." The dogfight evolved rapidly. Vorath interceptors were fast and deadly, but they were designed to fight at range with energy weapons. The F-16s closed to knife-fighting range, where maneuverability mattered, more than shields, where pilot skill trumped technological advantage. Within 2 minutes, 3 more Vorath craft were falling from the sky in flames. Sarah ignored the air battle and focused on her mission. The research colony was 20 miles ahead, and her threat display was showing exactly what she'd feared. Anti-aircraft emplacements surrounding the compound, with overlapping fields of fire that would shred any conventional approach. "Warthog elements, you seeing this?" she asked the other A-10 pilots. "Copy that, Warhawk," came Hammer's gravelly voice. "Looks like a standard AA-8 defense grid. Plasma turrets, missile batteries, probably some point defense lasers mixed in. Designed to stop shuttles and light armor. But not designed to stop us," Sarah finished. "Split into 3 groups. Hammer, take the western batteries. Anvil, you've got the eastern side. I'll take the north with my element. Apache gunships, hang back and provide cover fire once we've cleared initial defenses. On my mark, we go in low and loud." She pushed her stick forward and the A-10 responded instantly, dropping toward the deck. The altimeter unwound rapidly as she descended. 10,000 feet, 5,000, 3,000, at 1,000 feet. Above ground level, she leveled off and accelerated to maximum speed. The Warthog wasn't built for velocity, but what it lacked in raw speed it made up for in stability and precision. The terrain blurred beneath her as she screamed toward the colony at 400 miles per hour. The purple vegetation gave way to cleared ground, then to the defensive perimeter. The first plasma turret opened fire, bright green bolts tracking toward her aircraft. Sarah jinked left, then right, the A-10 responding to her inputs with mechanical precision. The plasma bolts missed by meters, dissipating harmlessly in her wake. The turret tried to track her, but its targeting computer was designed for high-altitude targets moving in predictable patterns. A Warthog pilot with decades of combat experience flying nap of the Earth was something it couldn't comprehend. "Fox 2, Sarah called calmly, designating her target and releasing a Maverick missile. The weapon dropped from her wing pylon, ignited, and streaked toward the plasma turret. The resulting explosion sent debris raining across the defensive line. All around the colony, the other A-10s were conducting their own attacks. Hammer came in from the west, his GAU-8 cannon roaring to life with a sound like reality being torn apart. The depleted uranium rounds, each one the size of a soda bottle, punched through the plasma turret's armor plating with contemptuous ease. The turret exploded spectacularly, secondary detonations cooking off stored ammunition. "That's what I'm talking about." Hammer whooped over the comm. "These Vorath shields don't mean squat against good old-fashioned bullets." The defensive grid, so carefully arranged to stop modern military craft, was being systematically dismantled by aircraft that fought like their ancestors from 500 years ago. The Vorath defenders had never encountered weapons that simply ignored their electronic countermeasures, that couldn't be jammed or spoofed or deflected by energy shields. Sarah made another pass, this time targeting a missile battery that was trying to get a lock on one of the Apache helicopters. Her targeting computer gave her a firing solution, and she squeezed the trigger. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon spoke with its characteristic brrr-t sound, 65 rounds per second of armor-piercing devastation. The missile battery disintegrated under the onslaught. "Warthog element's defensive grid is suppressed," she reported. "Apache gunships, you are cleared hot. Get those people loaded." The helicopters swept forward, their rotors beating the air with rhythmic precision. They were older designs, proven through decades of combat, and they performed their role with practiced efficiency. The lead Apache, call sign Hellfire, dropped into a hover above the colony's central courtyard while the others established defensive positions around the perimeter. On the ground, the research staff were already running toward the helicopters. Sarah could see them through her cockpit canopy, 47 people who'd been preparing for death suddenly given a chance at life. They moved with surprising order, the adults helping children, everyone following the evacuation protocols they'd probably drilled 100 times, never expecting to use them. But the Vorath weren't going to let them escape without a fight. "Multiple contacts inbound," Whiskey called out, his voice sharp with urgency. "Ground armor, 6 units, heavy assault class. They're making a run for the colony from the east." Sarah banked hard, bringing her aircraft around. Her tactical display showed 6 Vorath heavy tanks, each one the size of a small building, advancing across the open ground at surprising speed. The extraction zone was a clearing in the purple forest, barely large enough for the operation Sarah had planned. The Apache helicopters touched down first, their rotors still spinning as the researchers stumbled out onto solid ground. Medical personnel from the Krilthan recovery teams were already waiting, portable shelters being erected to check the evacuees for injuries and exposure. Sarah circled overhead in her A-10, watching the scene unfold while keeping one eye on her threat displays. The Vorath had to know by now that something had gone wrong. Their ground forces were probably regrouping, and it was only a matter of time before reinforcements arrived. "All aircraft, sit rep," she called out, wanting to know the status of her wing. The responses came in quickly, a mix of confidence and concern. Most of the fighters were low on fuel but operational. 3 A-10s had taken damage, including Bricksbird with its torn wing. 1 F-16 had expended all its missiles and was down to guns only. But everyone was still flying, still in the fight. "Recovery shuttle ETA 2 minutes, Vexthar's voice announced. "Captain Mitchell, I must inform you that War Leader Krethenach has realized the diversion for what it was. He is repositioning elements of his fleet. You will have a narrow window for extraction. Understood, Colonel. We'll be ready. Sarah switched to her wing frequency. All pilots, listen up. Recovery shuttles are inbound. F-16s and F-35s will load first since they can't hover. Warthogs and Apache birds will provide cover until everyone else is aboard. Then we load up. Stay sharp, stay alert, and if you see anything that looks hostile, you are cleared to engage. The first Krilthan recovery shuttle descended through the cloud layer, a massive craft easily 3 times the size of any human aircraft. Its belly opened to reveal a cavernous hangar space, and one by one, the F-16s and F-35s flew inside, their pilots expertly navigating the tight confines. The shuttle's gravity plating held the aircraft in place without need for landing gear. While the first shuttle was loading, Sarah spotted movement on her tactical display. Ground vehicles fast-moving coming from the direction of the Vorath base. They were 15 miles out and closing. Contact, ground pursuit, multiple vehicles inbound from bearing 180, she reported. Looks like light armor and troop transports. They're moving fast. Hammer's voice came through immediately. Want me to go say hello? Negative, Hammer. Save your ammo. They're too far out to threaten the extraction yet, but keep eyes on them. The second recovery shuttle arrived and the Apache helicopters lifted off in sequence, each one carefully maneuvering into the hangar bay. The researchers were already aboard the first shuttle, receiving medical attention and probably unable to believe they were actually safe. Sarah checked her fuel gauge. 20% remaining, enough to make it to the shuttle with a small reserve, but not enough for any extended combat. The other Warthogs were in similar situations. They'd done what they came to do, accomplished the impossible, and now it was time to go home. Warhawk, this is Spectre, came a new voice. One of the F-35 pilots who'd already loaded onto the first shuttle. I'm picking up energy signatures from orbit. Multiple Vorath destroyers breaking formation and heading this way. Looks like Krethnak figured out where we are. Sarah's jaw tightened. ETA? 8 minutes to orbital bombardment range. Once they get line of sight, they can light up this whole area with plasma cannons. 8 minutes. The last shuttle was loading the Apache helicopters now, and after that there would just be 6 A-10s left to recover. It would be tight, but they could make it. Probably, then her threat warning system lit up again and everything got complicated. Missile launch, air-to-air, extreme range. Whiskey's voice was sharp. Vorath fighters inbound from high altitude, I count 12 bogies. They must have been holding back as a reserve. Sarah's mind calculated options at lightning speed. 12 fresh fighters against 6 low-fuel Warthogs. The Vorath had speed, altitude, and full weapons. Her people had fumes in their tanks and prayers in their hearts. It wasn't a fair fight, which meant she had to make it unfair in a different direction. All Warthog elements, listen carefully, she said, her voice calm despite the pounding of her heart. Those fighters are coming in fast and high, which means they're expecting us to run. We're not going to run. We're going to do the last thing they expect, which is, Brick asked. We're going to charge them. Hammer, Anvil, Brick, you 3 form up on my wing. Chains and Bulldog, you stay low and cover the shuttle. If anything gets past us, you kill it. Everyone else on me. We're going hunting. The 4 A-10s formed up in a tight diamond formation and began climbing. The Vorath fighters were diving toward them, sleek predators confident in their superiority. Their missiles were already in the air, 6 weapons tracking toward the climbing Warthogs. Deploy countermeasures on my mark, Sarah commanded, watching her display as the missiles closed. 3, 2, 1 mark. All 4 A-10s released flares and chaff simultaneously, creating a cloud of interference that would make targeting difficult. The missiles wavered, their tracking systems confused by the sudden bloom of false targets. 4 of them went after the flares. 2 kept locked on solid targets. Sarah watched one of those missiles head straight for Hammer's aircraft. Hammer, brake left. I see it, Hammer replied, his voice tight. He pulled into a hard turn that should have been impossible for an aircraft as heavy as the Warthog, but decades of modifications and the skill of an expert pilot made the maneuver work. The missile overshot, detonating 100 meters behind him. The second missile locked onto Anvil. She tried to evade, but she was slower to react, and the missile was coming in at an angle that limited her options. Sarah watched in horror as the weapon closed the distance, certain it would connect. At the last second, Brick's A-10 slid between Anvil and the missile. The weapon, unable to adjust to the new target, slammed into Brick's aircraft just behind the cockpit. The explosion tore through the fuselage, and Sarah saw pieces of aircraft flying in all directions. "Brick!" she shouted into the comm. "Brick, respond! Static!" Then, impossibly, Brick's voice came through, strained but alive. "Still here, Warhawk. Lost my entire tail section. Both engines are gone. I'm gliding, sort of. This bird is not going to fly much longer." Sarah looked at her tactical display and saw Brick's aircraft icon flickering. He was losing altitude rapidly. Essentially a glider now with no power and limited control. The recovery shuttle was 2 miles away, but it might as well have been on the moon. "All units, Brick is going down," she announced. "Chains, Bulldog, can you reach him?" "Negative, Warhawk," Chains replied. "We're too far out and he's losing altitude too fast." The Vorath fighters were almost on them now, 12 against 4, and one of those 4 was barely flying. Sarah made her decision in the space between heartbeats. Hammer, Anvil, engage those fighters. Keep them busy. "I'm going after Brick." "Warhawk, you can't," Hammer protested. "Your fuel is my problem, not yours. Now go kill some bad guys and let me work." She broke formation and dove toward Brick's tumbling aircraft. The Warthog was spinning slowly, its pilot fighting to maintain even basic control with only manual reversion and the shattered remains of his control surfaces. Sarah could see the damage clearly now. The entire tail section was gone. Both engines were trailing smoke, and there were holes in the fuselage big enough to throw a basketball through. And somehow, impossibly, it was still in the air. "Brick, this is Warhawk. I need you to stabilize your bird as much as possible. I'm going to try something crazy." "Try something crazy?" Despite his situation, Brick managed to laugh. "This whole mission is crazy." "What's a little more?" Sarah positioned her A-10 beneath and slightly behind Brick's aircraft. What she was about to attempt wasn't in any manual, wasn't taught at any flight school, and probably violated several laws of physics. But she'd seen old footage from Earth's history, back when pilots still did things like mid-air refueling and formation flying at air shows. "I'm going to nudge your aircraft with mine," she explained. "Use my engines to give you lift and direction. It's going to be rough, but if I can keep you in the air long enough, we can make it to the shuttle." "You'll damage your own bird," Brick objected. "Good thing the Warthog is built tough. Now shut up and let me concentrate." She eased her throttle forward, climbing carefully until her aircraft's back was almost touching Brick's belly. The 2 planes were so close that she could see every rivet and weld in his damaged fuselage. She adjusted her angle of attack, using her wings to create lift not just for herself but for the aircraft above her. It worked. Sort of. Brick's descent slowed, and Sarah found that by carefully adjusting her thrust and position, she could actually steer both aircraft together. It was like flying a plane while carrying another plane, and her fuel gauge was dropping at an alarming rate as her engines strained under the extra weight. "Recovery shuttle, this is Warhawk," she called out. "I need you to extend your hangar bay and get ready for an emergency landing. 2 birds coming in hot. One of them isn't under full control." The Krilthan pilot's response was immediate. "Acknowledged, Warhawk. We see you. Bay is extending. Guidance beams are active." Above them, Hammer and Anvil were giving the Vorath fighters the fight of their lives. The bridge of the Steadfast Resolve was a scene of controlled chaos as the massive carrier burned hard for the edge of the engagement zone. Behind them, the Krilthan fleet was executing a fighting retreat, trading shots with the Vorath blockade while maintaining formation. It was a masterclass in military discipline, but everyone knew the real success had happened below, where 30 human aircraft had accomplished what an entire fleet could not. Sarah Mitchell stood before Colonel Vexthar, her flight suit still bearing the marks of combat. Around her, the other pilots had gathered, some nursing minor injuries, all of them exhausted but alive. The bridge crew worked around them, professional enough to maintain focus on their duties while stealing glances at the humans who had just rewritten the book on impossible missions. Vexthar's 4 eyes studied Sarah for a long moment before he spoke. "Captain, when you first proposed this operation, I calculated your chances of success at approximately 3%. That was before I saw your aircraft, which lowered my estimate to 1%. After witnessing your tactics, I became certain you would all die. And yet here we are," Sarah replied, keeping her voice respectful but meeting his gaze steadily. "Indeed." The colonel's mandibles clicked, and he turned to gesture at a holographic display showing the full tactical situation. "War leader Krethnak has withdrawn his fleet to high orbit. He is not pursuing us despite having the forces to do so. Do you know why?" Sarah considered the question. He's confused? More than confused, Captain. He is terrified. Vexthar manipulated the display, bringing up combat footage from the surface battle. In one engagement, you destroyed or disabled 32 separate defensive emplacements, 6 heavy tanks, and 12 interceptor craft. You did this with aircraft that our databases classify as primitive, using weapons that galactic militaries abandoned centuries ago, and you accomplished your mission without losing a single pilot or evacuee. He zoomed in on footage of an A-10 taking missile hits and continuing to fly. This should not be possible. By every calculation, every tactical model we possess, your aircraft should have been shot down within minutes of entering atmosphere. Instead, you carved through Vorath defenses like they were training exercises. Krethnak is withdrawing because he does not understand what happened, and commanders who do not understand their enemy do not win battles. Ambassador Thelnok drifted forward, his ethereal form pulsing with colors that Sarah had learned indicated deep thought.
Captain Mitchell, may I ask you something?
During the extraction, you placed your own aircraft at risk to save your wingman. You had insufficient fuel, the tactical situation was deteriorating, and by all logic, you should have abandoned him and saved yourself. Why did you not? Sarah glanced over at Brick, who was having his burns treated by a medical team, but still managed to raise a hand in acknowledgement. Because that's not how humans fly, Ambassador. We brought 30 pilots to Hadron 7, and we were always going to bring 30 pilots back. That's the deal. Nobody gets left behind, even if it means risking the entire mission, especially then. Sarah's voice was firm. See, Ambassador, your advanced militaries have optimized everything. You've calculated the most efficient tactics, the best kill ratios, the optimal force deployment, but somewhere in all that optimization, you forgot something important. Wars aren't won by calculations. They're won by people who refuse to quit, who fight for each other instead of just fighting against the enemy. Vexthar was quiet for a moment. Then he straightened to his full imposing height and did something Sarah had never seen a Krilthan officer do. He placed his clawed hand over his chest in what she recognized as a gesture of deep respect. Captain Mitchell, on behalf of the Krilthan Empire and the Allied Council, I thank you and your pilots for your service today.
You have rescued 47 innocents from certain death and demonstrated that perhaps we have forgotten more than we realized in our pursuit of technological superiority. He turned to address his bridge crew.
Note in the official record that the human aircraft, particularly the A-10 Thunderbolt, are to be classified as viable military assets in future operations. Further note that human pilots are to be considered elite combatants regardless of their equipment specifications. What we witnessed today was not technological triumph. It was triumph of will, skill, and courage. A cheer went up from the bridge crew, surprising Sarah. These were Krilthan warriors, species known across the galaxy for their discipline and stoicism, and they were cheering for a ragtag collection of human pilots flying museum pieces. The celebration was interrupted by an urgent beep from the communications station. A young Krilthan officer looked up, his expression troubled. Colonel, we are receiving a transmission. It is from War Leader Krethnak himself, requesting to speak with Captain Mitchell. The bridge went silent. Vexthar's 4 eyes narrowed dangerously. He wishes to speak with the human commander? This is highly irregular. Sarah stepped forward. I'll take it, Colonel. I'd as well hear what he has to say. After a moment's hesitation, Vexthar nodded. Very well. But I will monitor the conversation. If he makes threats, then we'll deal with it. Sarah moved to the communications console and a holographic image flickered to life before her. War Leader Krethnak was imposing even as a projection. He stood nearly 9 feet tall, his body covered in the biomechanical armor that Vorath warriors were famous for. His face was angular and predatory, with eyes that glowed with internal light. He radiated menace and power, the kind of presence that made lesser species instinctively step back. Sarah didn't step back. She met his glowing gaze with calm professionalism. War Leader, she said simply, you wanted to talk? Krethnak studied her for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was surprisingly measured. Captain Mitchell, I congratulate you on your victory today. It was unexpected. We get that a lot. I have commanded fleets for 30 cycles, Captain. I have broken blockades and conquered systems. I have faced the finest warriors from a dozen species. Today was the first time in my career that I did not understand what happened on the battlefield. He leaned forward slightly, and Sarah could see genuine curiosity in those glowing eyes. Your aircraft are slow. Your weapons are primitive. Your tactics violate every principle of modern warfare, and yet you succeeded where logic said you must fail. I wish to understand how. Sarah considered her answer carefully. This was an enemy commander, someone responsible for the deaths of countless innocents. But he was also a warrior speaking to another warrior, and there was a strange honor in that. War leader, your tactics are based on assumptions, she began. You assume that faster is always better. You assume that energy weapons are superior to kinetic weapons. You assume that advanced technology wins battles. Those assumptions work 99% of the time, so you've built your entire military doctrine around them. She gestured to the hangar bay visible through the viewport, where her battered A-10s were being serviced. But humans learned a long time ago that assumptions get you killed. We build aircraft that can be repaired with basic tools and field conditions. We use weapons that function without computer assistance. We train our pilots to fly manually because computers can fail. And most importantly, we fight for each other, not just for victory. Krethnak was silent for a moment. You speak of your A-10 Thunderbolt with great respect. It is an ancient design unchanged for centuries. Why do your people still fly such outdated machines? Because sometimes, war leader, the old ways are the best ways. That aircraft was designed to do one job: support ground troops and destroy enemy armor. It does that job better than anything else we've ever built. Why would we change something that works? Sarah allowed herself a slight smile. Besides, there's something to be said for flying a machine that's older than your grandparents. It connects you to history, to every pilot who ever climbed into that cockpit. You're not just flying an aircraft. You're continuing a tradition. Tradition. Krethnak seemed to taste the word. An interesting concept. The Vorath abandoned tradition long ago in favor of efficiency. How's that working out for you? For the first time, something that might have been amusement flickered across the war leader's face. Today, not well. But I did not call merely to discuss philosophy, Captain. I called to deliver a message. You have earned my respect, and the respect of every warrior who witnessed your attack. The Vorath will remember this day. We will remember that humans do not yield, that they fight with weapons we dismissed as obsolete, and that they triumph through will rather than technology. He straightened, his posture becoming more formal. I am withdrawing from Hadron 7. The research colony is no longer a target of strategic value, and I will not waste my warriors on an enemy I do not fully understand. But Captain Mitchell, hear this. We will study your tactics. We will analyze your aircraft. And the next time our forces meet, we will be prepared. Looking forward to it, war leader, Sarah replied calmly. Fair warning, though. We've been fighting for 500 years with essentially the same basic aircraft. Every generation thinks they've figured out how to beat us. Every generation learns otherwise. Krethnak's expression shifted to something that might have been respect. Then perhaps we will learn faster than others.